The gallery was too quiet for a Friday night. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the brass doors of Whitmore Contemporary, the kind of silence that exists under sound, like the space between heartbeats. Expensive shoes on marble, the soft clink of wine glasses, a cellist in the corner playing something minor and unsettling. But underneath it all, nothing. No laughter, no comfortable chatter, just the careful choreography of people who'd learned not to move too freely. I'd worked 3 galleries in the last 2 years, so I recognized the signs. This wasn't the usual Friday art crowd collectors, Instagram influencers, the chattering class of Manhattan's Upper East Side. These people were different. They moved with a kind of contained violence, like coiled springs waiting for pressure. The Rothko retrospective had drawn them. Apparently, my boss, Gerald, had insisted I work the opening shift alone. "You have a gift, Margot," he'd said that afternoon, his hands folded on the desk like a prayer. "People trust you. You make them comfortable." What he meant was, "You're expendable on a Friday night, and I can save labor costs." So there I was in a black slip dress that cost me 3 hours of barista shifts, carrying a tray of Sauvignon Blanc that probably cost more than my monthly rent, trying to disappear into the artwork. That's when I saw him. He stood before the largest painting, an untitled piece from 1958, all deep reds and blacks, like something had bled into the canvas and never stopped. He was tall enough that I had to angle my gaze upward even from across the room. Dark suit, darker eyes, and something about the way the gallery light fell across his face made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't name. Not attraction, not immediately. It was something else. Something closer to recognition of a predator, the way a deer knows. "Wine?" I moved toward him, arm extended, smile professionally anchored in place. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the painting, and for a moment I thought he might not respond at all. The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and wrong. "No." His voice was low, controlled, each consonant precise as a blade. I should have walked away. That was the job offer. Retreat. Offer again in 20 minutes if the glass emptied. But something made me hesitate. "It's a good vintage," I offered, which was stupid and desperate and completely against protocol. Now he turned. His eyes moved from the painting to me, with the speed of a camera lens adjusting. Dark brown, almost black in the gallery's amber light. They held no warmth, no interest. Just an assessment so complete and unflinching that I felt suddenly naked in my borrowed dress. "I don't drink when I'm working," he said. "You work here?" A smile moved across his mouth, not a real one. The kind a shark might make if it learned human expressions from a textbook. In a manner of speaking. He turned back to the painting. I stood there, tray awkwardly suspended, acutely aware that I should leave. Every instinct was screaming it. There was something about him that seemed to push against the air, a gravitational pull that made thinking difficult. My heartbeat had picked up. I could feel it in my throat, behind my eyes. I was turning to go when his hand moved. It wasn't violent, just a gesture toward the empty glass in my other hand, the one meant for my own use during breaks. A small, almost gentle motion. "You should be more careful where you stand," he said softly. "When you're distracted." "I'm not distracted," I lied. "You are." He glanced at me again, and this time there was something in his expression that looked almost like concern, which somehow felt more dangerous than indifference. "You're standing too close to someone you don't know, in a room full of people who would notice that. And you don't seem like the type to want to be noticed." My mouth had gone dry. What type do I seem like? He took a step closer, just one, but it changed everything about the space between us. I could smell him now, underneath the gallery's signature scent of white paint and expensive air conditioning, something dark, cedar, smoke, like a room where serious decisions had been made. "The type that should leave," he said quietly. I should have. God knows every sensible part of my brain was screaming at me to move, but there was something hypnotic about the moment, something that felt like standing on the edge of a very tall building and understanding, for the first time, what falling would feel like. "I work here," I said. "Not tonight, you don't." Before I could process what he meant, I felt a hand at the small of my back, not quite touching, hovering just above the fabric of my dress. Gerald, my boss. His face had gone the color of old parchment. "Margot," he said, his voice compressed to the smallest possible frequency. "You're excused for the evening. Go home. But my shift is over." The pressure of his hand increased fractionally, a clear instruction to move. I looked back at the man by the painting, He was already turning away, returning his full attention to the Rothko, as though our entire conversation had been something he'd imagined, as though I'd already ceased to exist. I let Gerald guide me toward the back of the gallery, past the restrooms, and into the staff area where I'd left my coat. My hands were shaking adrenaline, I told myself, just the strangeness of the interaction. But as I pulled on my jacket and moved toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that I'd been assessed and found wanting, or perhaps worse, found interesting. The October air hit me like cold water when I stepped onto the street. Behind me, through the gallery's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see him, still watching the painting, still impossibly still. My phone buzzed as I walked toward the subway. A text from Gerald. "Don't come back until Tuesday. I'll call you." I should have been relieved. Instead, as I descended into the fluorescent tunnel of the MTA, I found myself searching for his face in my mind, trying to catalog the specific quality of his gaze, the exact timbre of his voice when he'd told me to leave. The warning I should have heeded. I didn't know it then, but I was already caught, already pulled into something I had no framework for understanding. That moment by the Rothko wasn't the beginning of a story. It was the moment I'd stepped into a room I couldn't exit, the moment everything shattered. Tuesday came with rain. I'd spent the weekend telling myself that Friday had been a fluke, an overly intense stranger, a weird gallery crowd, Gerald's overreaction to what had probably been nothing. But the text he'd sent Sunday night had unsettled that narrative. "You're working weekday shifts only until further notice. This is for your safety," his safety, not mine. By the time I returned to Whitmore, I'd convinced myself I wouldn't see him again. That he'd been a one-time visitor, drawn by the Rothko like everyone else, probably a collector or an investor or someone's intimidating cousin. I'd file him away in the same mental folder where I kept other strange encounters, the subway preacher who'd known my name, the woman who'd looked exactly like my mother at a crosswalk, the inexplicable moments that populated real life, like glitches. I was reorganizing the contemporary section, moving pieces for a new installation when Gerald appeared. He looked worse than he had Friday. His usual professorial air had cracked, revealing something underneath that looked like fear. "Come to my office," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? "No, come." His office was small, obsessively neat, smelling of leather and old book pages. He closed the door carefully behind us, and that small gesture, the deliberateness of it, told me something significant was happening. "What's his name?" I asked before he could speak. Gerald's eyes widened. "How did you—" He asked about me, didn't he? My boss sank into his chair like a man who'd been holding his breath for days, and finally allowed himself to exhale. "He called me, Saturday morning, asked for your employment file." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "He asked for Gerald. What did you tell him?" "Nothing." Gerald's hands were shaking slightly as he folded them on his desk. "I told him nothing, and he said that was the wrong answer. That if I wanted to keep the gallery operational, if I wanted to keep my insurance and my licenses and my ability to continue existing in New York, I would stop asking questions and give him what he wanted." I sat down without being invited. "What is he?" "I don't know his name," Gerald said flatly. "And if you're smart, if you're as intelligent as I believe you to be, you won't ask anyone else either. You won't search for him. You won't mention him to anyone. You'll simply understand that he's not someone to have on your radar." He said, "Don't come back until Tuesday." "I know." He said he was working. "I know." "Gerald, what is he working?" "Don't." My boss's voice had taken on a sharp edge. "Margot, listen to me very carefully. I've been running this gallery for 15 years. In that time, I've learned that there are people in this city who operate in a way that the rest of us don't acknowledge. They're like the subway rats. Everyone knows they exist. Everyone tries to ignore them, and the smart ones never, ever make eye contact. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting." He stood, moved to his window that overlooked Madison Avenue, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Do your job. Be polite to customers. Don't draw attention. And if you see him again, you apologize for the inconvenience, and you excuse yourself from the interaction. You understand?" I understood. What I understood was that the man from Friday had somehow mattered enough to threaten my boss's livelihood, that he had the kind of power that made a competent, controlled man like Gerald crumble into warnings and fear. The rest of my Tuesday shift passed in a fog. I moved between the galleries on autopilot, reciting facts about artists I'd memorized, smiling at collectors, pretending my entire nervous system wasn't vibrating at a frequency just below human hearing. He didn't come back Tuesday, but Wednesday, I felt him before I saw him. It was the same sensation I'd had Friday, that gravitational pull, that sense of air pressure changing. I was in the back office, reviewing inventory, when the museum's temperature seemed to shift. I looked up just as he appeared in the doorway. He was different in daylight. Harder. The elegant veneer of Friday's suit had been replaced with something more utilitarian. Dark jeans. A charcoal sweater that fit him like it had been custom-made. A leather jacket that looked expensive and worn. His dark hair was slightly damp, like he'd come from somewhere with rain. Margot. He said my name, like he was testing the shape of it in his mouth. Like it mattered that it was mine. You can't be back here, I said automatically. I can be anywhere I want. He stepped inside, closed the door. The office suddenly felt significantly smaller. Is that what Gerald told you? That I'm dangerous? That you should stay away? He told me you're not someone to have on my radar. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Smart man. Terrible at following his own advice, though. He still hasn't given me your information. There's nothing to give. I'm nobody. You're somebody. He moved around the desk with a kind of fluid grace that should have looked out of place in the gallery's minimalist office, but somehow didn't. You're the girl who offered wine to someone who doesn't drink. Who stood her ground when most people would have run? Who's smart enough to be afraid of me but brave enough not to show it until she's alone? I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every nerve ending was screaming danger, but underneath that was something else. A pull. An acknowledgement of something I couldn't name. What do you want? I asked. Right now? To know why you flinched when your boss touched your back. The question caught me so off guard that I answered before I could think better of it. I didn't. You did. Your shoulders went tight. Your breathing changed. He leaned against the desk, impossibly relaxed, given the intimacy of the space and the intensity of his gaze. You're used to people not respecting your boundaries. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you. Your name is Margot Chen. You're 24. You moved to New York 3 years ago from Portland. You work 3 jobs to afford a studio apartment in Washington Heights. You volunteer at a crisis hotline on Sunday nights. You have excellent taste in art and terrible taste in men, which means you haven't dated anyone since arriving in the city. I felt sick. You had me investigated. Of course I did. He said it like it was obvious, like investigating someone was as natural as breathing. I find you interesting. Stop. I stood, putting the desk between us. I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not interested in whatever this is. You can't threaten my boss and show up and tell me you know everything about my life. That's not how normal interactions work. I'm not a normal man. He watched me with those dark eyes, and I realized that there was something almost gentle in his expression, like he was looking at something fragile that needed to be handled carefully. And you already knew that. On Friday, you knew. You sensed it. That's why you were afraid. I'm still afraid. Good. Fear is smart. He stood, moved toward the door. But you're curious too. That's more dangerous than the fear. Dangerous for who? He paused at the threshold, turned back. For both of us. Probably. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the office with the rain sound from the open window and the certainty that nothing in my life would ever be simple again. The next time I saw him was at the coffee shop on my morning shift. Not the gallery shift, one of my other jobs. The one that paid the least and occupied the early hours of the day. A place called Vina's in Midtown, where I made lattes for tourists and Instagram models and occasionally someone who seemed to actually appreciate good espresso. It was Thursday, 6:30 a.m. The shop was empty, except for early commuters checking their phones. The kind of neutral space where nothing seemed possible except the acquisition of caffeine. He was sitting at the window table, the one I always reserved mentally for people who actually wanted to read or think, rather than perform being out in public. He had a book open in front of him, something hardcover and substantial, but he wasn't reading it. He was watching the street, waiting for something, or waiting for someone, me. I don't work here, I said when I got to the table, even though he hadn't ordered yet. I mean, I do, but I'm not. You need to not do this. Do what? He looked up at me, and in the early morning light, I could see something I hadn't seen before. Not quite hardness, wariness maybe, the kind that suggested he'd been awake for longer than sleep could fix. Follow me, investigate me, show up places where I work. I had coffee. He gestured to the empty cup in front of him. Is that following you? Or is it just coincidence? Nothing about you is coincidence. He set the book down carefully. His hands were interesting, hands large, with a few scars across the knuckles that spoke of violence or work or both. Sit for a moment. I can't. I'm working. Your shift doesn't start for 2 minutes, and there's no one else here except Marcus, who's in the back and who won't notice if you take 5 minutes. He paused. I know because I've already established the patterns. You work Tuesday through Friday mornings, 6:30 to 11. You're reliable. You're quiet. You tip out your tips at the end of the shift to the other baristas. You picked up an extra shift last Thursday because someone called in sick. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Stop. Sit. It wasn't violent. His voice was still controlled, still measured. But there was something underneath it, a note of command that made it clear he wasn't asking, that in his world, requests were formalities before obligations. I sat. What's your name? I asked. Your actual name? He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him making a calculation, testing whether I was worth the honesty. Finally, he said, Dante. Just one name. Which meant it probably wasn't real, or it was real, and came with a history he wasn't interested in explaining. What do you want from me, Dante? I haven't decided yet. That's not an acceptable answer. He leaned back, and something in his expression shifted. Softened, maybe, or became something closer to genuine. On Friday, when you offered me wine, you were the first person in 3 years to treat me like an ordinary man. Like I was just someone looking at a painting, not like I was a threat, not like I was something to be afraid of. Maybe I was afraid, I said quietly. Maybe I just hid it better. No. He reached across the table, and I flinched, but all he did was turn the book toward me. It was Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, which felt like a deliberate choice. You have a particular kind of courage, the kind that comes from understanding what you're afraid of, and moving toward it anyway. I'm not moving toward you. You're sitting at a table with me at 6 a.m. instead of calling the police. Would that help? I asked. Calling the police? He smiled, a real one, this time. It transformed his face from dangerous to merely beautiful, which somehow was worse. No. But I appreciate that you're trying to be rational about the situation. I stood up. I don't understand what this is. Why you're interested in me. Why you're... I gestured vaguely at the evidence of his surveillance. Why you're doing any of this. Because I'm a man who takes what I want, he said simply. And I find I want to know you better. Not in a violent way. Not in a way that requires anything from you except your time and your honest conversation. I'm not interested in being wanted by someone like you. You're very interested. He picked up his book, opened it as if our conversation was already over. But you're also smart enough to be afraid. That's why this is going to take longer than I initially planned. You'll resist. You'll try to maintain distance. But eventually, you'll realize that I'm more truthful than any of the men you've dated, more present than any of the people in your life actually are, and far less willing to let you disappear into the background. And what if I don't want that? Then you shouldn't have been born with eyes that see through bullshit, he said, without looking up from the page. You should go back to work. Marcus will notice soon. I walked away from the table, my hands shaking as I tied my apron. For the next 4 hours and 30 minutes, I made coffee on autopilot while he sat at the window table and read his book, occasionally sipping water, sometimes glancing up to watch me. By 11 o'clock, when my shift ended, I'd stopped asking myself if I should leave through the back entrance. I'd stopped pretending I was going to get the police involved. I'd stopped everything except the simple acknowledgement that something significant was beginning, and I had no idea how to stop it. When I emerged from the back room after changing out of my work clothes, he was waiting by the door. I need to walk home, I said. I'll walk with you. I don't want. I know. He opened the door, and October cold rushed in. That's precisely why I'm coming. We walked in silence through the early morning streets of Midtown, the city still half asleep. The light still soft and forgiving. He didn't touch me, didn't speak, just existed beside me with a kind of patient inevitability, like he knew exactly where this was going, and had already accepted the parameters of the journey. It wasn't until we reached my building that he finally spoke. My business is dangerous, he said quietly. The people I associate with are dangerous. Being around me will put you in situations that most people would find unbearable. I know. You don't. But you will. He paused at the steps. If you're smart, you'll ask me to stop now. You'll tell me to never contact you again. You'll delete whatever hope you're developing and move forward with a normal life. Is that what you want? No. It's what I should want. Because what I actually want is selfish and unfair and dangerous to you in ways I probably can't even articulate. He looked at me, and in the early morning light, I saw something break open in his expression. Vulnerability. Real and raw, and immediately suppressed. But I'm not known for my selflessness. I should have said no. Instead, I asked, "What happens now?" "Now you go inside, you shower, you change, and you wait for my call." "What if I don't answer?" "Then I'll know you're braver than I thought, and I'll respect that." He turned to leave, then paused. "But I don't think you'll wait to answer." He was right. The call came at 3 in the afternoon. I'd spent the hours between mourning and then trying not to wait for it, which meant I'd checked my phone approximately 400 times, showered twice, reorganized my apartment, and read exactly 3 pages of a novel without retaining any information. When it rang, I knew it was him before checking the screen. My nervous system recognized his voice before my ears even registered the sound. "Margot." "Yes? Can you get out of your apartment unnoticed?" The question was so specifically dangerous that I almost hung up. Instead, I heard myself say, "I live alone. There's a fire escape. Use it. There's a car waiting on the corner of 175th and Broadway. Black Mercedes. License plate Delta 7 Tango Charlie. 5 minutes. Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk without the entire city listening." He hung up. I should have called the police. Should have sat on my couch and let the moment pass. Let whatever this was fade back into the reasonable world of normal interactions and appropriate boundaries. Instead, I was pulling on a coat, checking the fire escape for witnesses, climbing down the rusted metal steps while my heart hammered against my ribs. The Mercedes was waiting exactly where he'd said it would be. The driver, a man built like a concrete wall, with kind eyes that didn't match his imposing frame, didn't speak as I slid into the back seat. The car smelled like leather and expensive air, like a place where decisions that affected other people's lives were made with casual frequency. "He's waiting," the driver said as we pulled into traffic. That was the only thing he said for the entire 45-minute drive, which took us out of Manhattan and into a part of Brooklyn I'd never been to. Industrial. Empty. The kind of neighborhood that existed in the gaps of the city's official narrative. We pulled up to a warehouse, actual industrial building, not the gentrified kind with exposed brick and $3,000 monthly rents. The driver opened my door, and I stepped out into the kind of evening that felt like a threshold. The light was all golden and heavy, the kind that suggested something significant was about to occur. Dante was waiting inside. The space was enormous. 3 stories of empty room, punctuated by support beams and high windows that let in diagonal shafts of that golden light. But it wasn't empty, not exactly. There were maps on the walls, photographs, documents arranged in what looked like a complex system of connections, red string linking various items like something out of an obsessive person's crime board. "What is this?" I asked. "This is what I do." He moved toward the nearest wall, his silhouette sharp against the photographs. "I manage operations, supply chains, territorial interests, political arrangements, everything that requires money and power and a willingness to do what other people won't." I understood then. Or rather, I understood the shape of the thing, if not the specific details. Your organized crime, among other things. He gestured to the wall, and I approached it slowly, like it might bite. The photographs showed people, mostly men, some women. Some of the faces had lines through them. Others had photographs of the same person over the years, aging, changing. I've built a network over the past 8 years, started in the Dominican Republic, expanded into New York about 6 years ago. Now we operate across the Northeast. Drugs? Partially. Money laundering, extortion, protection services, real estate manipulation, whatever generates revenue and maintains power. He turned to face me. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're approaching. Because the woman I saw on Friday, the one who offered me wine like I was a human being, she deserves the truth before she becomes deeper involved. I haven't agreed to become involved. Haven't you?" He stepped closer. "You climbed down a fire escape to meet me. You got in a car with my driver. You're standing in my operations center. You're asking questions instead of running. Everything about this suggests you've already started making a choice. This is insane." "Yes." He reached out, and this time I didn't flinch when he touched me. His hand was warm, his fingers gentle, as they traced the line of my jaw. "It's completely insane, and I'm sorry for that, but I need you to understand something. The moment I saw you on Friday, the moment you offered me wine and looked at me like I was worth treating like a person, you became someone I pay attention to, someone I protect, someone I'm willing to go to war for. We've known each other for a week. I know. It doesn't make it less true. He dropped his hand. There's a man named Victor Colon. He runs most of the operations in the Bronx. Last week, he made a move into territory that belongs to my people. Not because he's strong enough, but because he's running scared. His family lost money in the Caribbean operation. He's desperate. Desperate men make reckless decisions. What does that have to do with me? One of Victor's men was at the gallery on Friday. He's not particularly bright, but he's observant. He noticed the way I reacted to you. He reported it up the chain. As of this morning, Victor knows that I'm interested in you. And men like Victor, when they sense a weakness, they move toward it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You've put me in danger. I know. You did this to me. I did. He moved away from me, walked to the far wall where the light was dying into shadow. I should have walked past you on Friday. Should have let you offer wine to someone else. Should have maintained the distance that keeps you safe. Instead, I followed my preference, and now you're become a liability to my business and a target for my enemies. So what happens now? Now, you have options. He turned back to face me, and in the fading light, he looked older, tired, like the weight of his choices was finally catching up with him. Option 1. You disappear. I set up an account with enough money to last you a year. You take it, leave New York, assume a new identity if you're cautious. You never contact anyone from your old life. You live quietly somewhere far away until this situation stabilizes, or until I'm dead, whichever comes first. And option 2? Option 2. You stay. You accept that you're now part of my world. You understand that there will be moments when you're afraid, when you witness things that will change how you see me, when the choice you made will feel like the worst mistake of your life. That's not an option. It is. Because option 2 also means that you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you dies, that I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe, that you become the thing in my world that's more valuable than money or power or dominion. He paused. That you become the thing I'd lose everything to protect. The warehouse was almost completely dark now, except for the last threads of light coming through the high windows. I need to go home, I whispered. I know. I need to think about this. You can think. He moved toward me, and I could barely see him now, just the shape of him in the darkness. You can choose. You can run. But Margot, I need you to know that whatever you choose, I'm not letting you go. So make your decision carefully. He kissed me then, his mouth soft against mine despite all the danger, all the threat, all the ways this was supposed to be impossible. It tasted like smoke and certainty, and the end of my old life. When he pulled away, I was breathing hard. Go home, he said. The driver will take you. I'll call tomorrow evening. The problem with fear is that it's exhausting. By Sunday, I'd been afraid continuously for approximately 72 hours. Afraid when I woke up. Afraid during my shifts at the gallery and the coffee shop. Afraid when I walked through my neighborhood, constantly scanning for faces that didn't belong. Afraid when I slept, my dreams populated with warehouse conversations and photographs of dead men. Dante hadn't called Sunday or Monday. His silence was its own kind of threat. By Tuesday, the fear had transformed into something else. Frustration, anger, the specific fury that comes from being made powerless in your own life. He arrived at the gallery at closing time. I was alone, which probably wasn't a coincidence. Gerald had taken to leaving early on days when I was scheduled, as if my presence had become too contaminated by association to remain in the space after business hours. I was reorganizing the stockroom when I felt the shift in air pressure that now meant Dante's presence. You didn't call, I said without turning around. I needed time to handle some complications. He was leaning against the doorframe, looking exhausted in a way I was beginning to recognize meant violence had occurred. There was a cut on his left hand, still fresh enough to be dark with blood. Victor made a move. I had to respond. Is he dead? No, not yet. He moved further into the room. He's making noise about your existence, asking questions, drawing attention. It's becoming untenable. So what do you want me to do? I turned to face him. Hide? Run? Apologize for existing? I want you to come with me. Come where? To my apartment. You'll stay there until the situation stabilizes, which means my people can keep you safe, which means you're not living alone in an apartment that Victor's men could access. And if I don't want to, then you die, he said simply. Maybe not immediately. Maybe they'd keep you alive long enough to use you as leverage. But that's the end point. So the only question is whether you'd prefer to die quickly or slowly. And I'm offering you a third option. Live. I felt something shift in my chest. Resignation, maybe. Or acceptance. The moment I'd understood on Friday that I was going to let this happen, the moment I'd climbed down the fire escape, had been the moment my consent stopped mattering. I need to pack, I said. There's a bag with everything you need already prepared. Of course there is. He watched me with those dark eyes while I finished the last of my inventory work. When I was done, he led me out through the employee entrance, past the security camera that I'd never questioned before, through the Manhattan streets that now felt hostile and thin with threat. His apartment was in a high-rise in Tribeca, the kind of place that existed above the regular city, that looked down on the world from behind tinted windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass, exposed brick, a kitchen that looked like it had never been used for cooking. Everything expensive and impersonal, like a luxury hotel room designed for someone who didn't actually live there. This way, he said, leading me toward the bedroom. My heart spiked. I know, that's not why. He showed me into a room that was clearly a guest bedroom, untouched and sterile. You have your own space, your own bathroom, everything you need. There's a kitchen, there's a library. During the day, my security team will maintain a perimeter outside the building. At night, I'll be here. This is a prison. It's a sanctuary. He set down my bag on the bed. There's a difference, though I understand why you might not see it yet. Call anyone you want from that phone. He pointed to a secure-looking device on the nightstand. The gallery, your other jobs, your family. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But Margot, he paused. Tell them the truth about where you are. Tell them I have you. Because if word gets out that you're in danger, every person in your old life becomes a target. You're using me as a hostage. I'm using you as leverage against myself. He moved toward the door. Stay here. Rest. I'll have food sent up. I waited until I heard him leave. Then I sat on the edge of the pristine guest bed and sobbed. It wasn't delicate crying. It was the kind of crying that comes from the collapse of normalcy. From the realization that every choice you made leading up to a moment of irrevocable change had been leading here all along. I'd thought I had agency. I'd thought I was choosing to involve myself in this. But the truth was simpler and worse. I'd been choosing the person I wanted to become, and that person existed in Dante's world whether I agreed to it or not. By evening, I'd exhausted my tears enough to function. The apartment felt different in darkness. The city lights below made it seem less like a bedroom and more like a observation deck where you could watch the world continue without you. I ordered food from the phone, Italian food, expensive, and ate it while sitting at the kitchen counter, looking at the space I was supposed to live in. Dante found me there around midnight. He looked worse in the apartment lights. The cut on his hand had been cleaned but not bandaged. There was a purple bruise spreading across his ribs, visible where his shirt hung open. He'd been in a fight, probably several. You should sleep, he said. I'm not tired. You're exhausted. He moved to the couch, collapsed into it like his bones had become too heavy. But you're not tired enough to surrender to it. I understand. I came and sat beside him, not close, but not far either. Tell me something true, I said. Just one thing. No business justifications, no strategic reasoning. Just the truth. He was quiet for a long moment. On Friday, when you offered me wine, I had been awake for 36 hours. I was meeting with Victor's representatives to negotiate the terms of his death. I was thinking about a body disposal and a warehouse location, and the probability that the situation would require me to kill someone I actually respected. And then you appeared, and you offered me wine like I was a human being, like my life had value beyond what I could produce or protect. He paused, his eyes fixed on the city below. That moment broke something in me. Made me remember why I'd ever wanted power in the first place. Not to control people, but to protect someone I cared about. He glanced at me. That's the truth. You're not a pawn in a game. You're the reason I'm playing the game at all. I reached out and took his hand, the one with the cut, the one that had hurt someone today. I held it carefully, like it was something that needed to be handled with understanding rather than judgment. I'm scared, I whispered. I know. I don't trust you. I know that too. But I'm still here. Yes, you are. He pulled me toward him, not with the kind of force that suggests dominance, but with something closer to desperation. I tucked myself into the space beside him, my head resting on his shoulder, my hand still holding his damaged one, and for the first time since Friday, something in my chest unclenched. This was surrender. Not the kind that comes from defeat, but the kind that comes from understanding that you've already lost the game and might as well stop pretending you're still playing. I lived in the apartment for 3 days before Dante touched me again. Not violently, not even romantically. It was something quieter, more insidious. He started leaving the door to his bedroom open when he showered, knowing I could see him through the gap, the broad shoulders, the scars across his back that told stories I wasn't ready to hear. He'd cook breakfast in the morning, knowing the domesticity of it would make everything feel more dangerous, not less. He'd sit close to me on the couch during the evening, our shoulders almost touching, the proximity creating a constant low hum of electricity that I couldn't ignore. On Thursday, I broke. We were in the library, a room I'd discovered on the second day that held thousands of books, many of them in languages I didn't understand. Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, the collection of someone who read widely and dangerously. I was reading when Dante entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "You're drinking again," I said. "Only with you." He handed me a glass, sat across from me in a leather chair. That changed after Friday. The wine was excellent, probably expensive, definitely not meant for someone like me. But I drank it because refusing felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. "I need to know the scope of this," I said carefully. "How many people? How many operations?" "Enough that Victor is the least of the problems." He swirled his wine. "I have interests in 5 states, relationships with 3 families in South America, a working arrangement with certain officials in government, a portfolio that requires constant maintenance and occasional violence." Occasional? Frequent. But I try to minimize civilian casualties. He said it like it was something to be proud of, which maybe in his world it was. "I have approximately 400 people working for me directly. Thousands more in ancillary positions. 400 people. Thousands of lives connected to his decisions." The scope of it made my head spin. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're asking. Because you deserve to know who you're living with. Because I'm tired of the performance." He leaned forward. "I've spent 8 years being someone specific. A man without vulnerabilities, without preferences that aren't strategic, without needs that can't be met with money or power. That performance has worked. It's kept me alive and my people relatively safe and my business profitable. But it's also lonely in a way that I didn't understand was loneliness until you offered me wine." I watched him over the rim of my glass. "You're trying to seduce me. I'm trying to be honest with you. The seduction is secondary." He paused. "Though not entirely secondary. Dante, I know. You don't trust me. You shouldn't. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to believe it even though you have no reason to. I will never hurt you, not intentionally, not in anger, not as leverage. You are the one thing in this entire world that I will not touch with anything except gentleness. I will kill for you. I will burn this entire operation down if necessary to keep you safe. But I will never hurt you." Something in his voice suggested this was a promise made to himself first, before me. Like he knew himself well enough to understand the danger he posed and was willing to commit to restraint. I set down my wine glass, stood, walked to the window where the city was beginning to glitter with evening light. "My parents want me to call them," I said. "They're scared. The gallery called to ask when I'm coming back. Gerald told them I'd been in an accident. I have 3 missed shifts from my other jobs." "I know. You know because you're monitoring my phone. I'm monitoring everything that could give Victor information about you or access to you." He came to stand beside me, careful not to touch. "Your family thinks you're in the hospital. Gerald is covering for you. Your other employer believes you've moved. As far as the world is concerned, Margot Chen has vanished, which is necessary, which is temporary, but which also means you can't pretend anymore that your old life is going to be waiting." "So what happens to me?" I asked quietly. "Do I disappear forever? Do I become a woman in your apartment, dependent on your security, your money, your control?" "No." He finally reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "I want to build something with you, but first, I need to finish what's happening with Victor. Once he's dead, once the territorial disputes are resolved, once the immediate threat is neutralized, then we can think about what comes next. Where you want to live. What kind of life you want. Whether you want to stay with me. And if I don't, then I'll let you go. I'll set up the same account I offered before. You'll disappear into a new life. But Margot," he tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes, "I don't think you'll want to leave. You can't know that." "No, but I can hope it, which is something I haven't done in years." He kissed me then, and it was different from the warehouse kiss. Slower, more careful, like he was tasting me instead of taking me, like I mattered more than the urgency of desire. When he pulled away, I felt something crack open in my chest, the wall I'd been building since Friday, the one that said I could maintain some version of my old self while living in his apartment and depending on his protection. That wall fractured. "I'm scared," I said again, which was becoming my prayer. "I know. But you're also brave. You're willing to sit in uncertainty, to let yourself want something even though the price is terrifying." He pressed his forehead against mine. "That's not weakness, Margot. That's the only kind of strength that matters." We spent the rest of the night in the library, talking. He told me about his childhood in the Dominican Republic, about the poverty that made violence seem like a reasonable career choice, about the moment he'd realized that power was just another word for the ability to protect people you cared about. I told him about my parents' disappointment when I chose art history instead of medicine, about the loneliness of moving to New York to become someone my family didn't recognize, about the ways I'd learned to disappear at gallery openings, making myself small so that I wouldn't be noticed. By the time the sun rose, we'd moved from the library to the couch, and I was asleep against his shoulder, his arm wrapped around me like I'd become something necessary for him to breathe. When I woke, he was still there, still holding me, still awake, like he'd spent the night simply existing in the space beside me, understanding without being told that this, not sex, not ownership, but presence was what I actually needed. The call came at 2 a.m. I was alone in the guest bedroom. We'd established a rhythm where Dante slept in his own room. The distance, a kind of restraint that made the moments we spent close feel more significant. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. His entire body went rigid. I heard the words through the walls. "Slow down. How many? Do we have the location?" Then silence. The specific silence of bad news being absorbed. When he appeared in my doorway, something fundamental had changed in his face. The careful control had been replaced by something raw, anger, but underneath it, fear. "Pack a bag," he said. "What's happening?" Victor made a move against my supply chain. Hit 3 warehouses in the Bronx. We lost maybe 30 people and about 10 million in product. He was already moving toward his bedroom, but more importantly, he took one of my people, a girl named Rosa. She works in the accounting department. She was ambushed outside a restaurant and taken. If she's still alive, Victor will use her to get to me. If she's dead, he'll use her body to send a message. He emerged from his room with a gun, actually saw him load it, which made my stomach turn and tuck it into the waistband of his pants. "I need to respond, which means I need to know you're safe." "Where are we going?" "Not we, you. My driver is waiting downstairs. There's a safe house in Westchester. You'll stay there until this is over. And if you, then my second in command will take care of you. You'll be given money, resources, safe passage out of the country if necessary." He was moving with quick, efficient motions, gathering things, a jacket, a phone, a knife that he strapped to his ankle. "But I'm not planning to die. I'm planning to kill Victor and everyone who made the decision to take Rosa." I felt something tighten in my chest. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know. A few hours, maybe all night." He paused at the door. "Maybe longer if things get complicated. If you get hurt." "I won't." He said it with such certainty that it became a vow. "Because I know you're waiting. Because that's something I'm not willing to sacrifice." He left before I could respond. I packed quickly, moving through the apartment like a ghost, gathering things that seemed important, the books I'd been reading, my journal, the one photograph I had of my parents. The driver was waiting as Dante had promised, and he drove me out of Manhattan and into the darkness of Westchester, with nothing but classical music on the radio. The safe house was on a private road, surrounded by trees, the kind of place that felt like the world had ended, and we were living in the aftermath. It had security cameras, armed guards, a basement that definitely contained things I didn't want to know about. The driver's partner, a woman named Sienna, with eyes that had seen too much, showed me to a bedroom and left me with a phone. "Mr. Dante will update when he can," she said. "He'll keep you safe." Then I was alone. The hours crawled. I tried to sleep and failed. Tried to read and couldn't focus on the words. At 5 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rosa is alive. Victor lost 40 people. First round to me." Relief flooded through me so violently that I had to sit down. An hour later, "Coming to you. Need to change first." I was at the window when his car pulled up, the sun rising pale and insufficient behind it. He looked destroyed. There was blood on his hands and his shirt, and his face had a rawness that suggested violence beyond the simple act of killing. Are you hurt? I was down the stairs before he was fully through the door. Not my blood. He let me pull him into the bathroom, let me run water over his hands while the blood, other people's blood, circled the drain like a statement. Victor's, Rosa's attackers. Victor's second in command. You killed them? Some of them. The rest, my people took care of. He watched his hands clean in the mirror as though they belonged to someone else. Rosa had been tortured, not killed, which means Victor was planning to use her. But we got her out before he could finish whatever he was planning. I grabbed a towel, dried his hands carefully. What happens now? Now I burn his entire operation to the ground. He pulled me against him, his clean hands in my hair, his blood-stained clothes pressed against the dress I'd slept in. Now I make sure he understands that taking anything from me has a price he's not willing to pay. And then I come back to you, and we figure out what happens next. He showered while I made coffee from the kitchen supplies that Sienna had stocked. When he emerged, he was wearing fresh clothes, his hair wet, his eyes still holding that raw edge but softened slightly by exhaustion. I need to sleep for 4 hours, he said. Real sleep. Which means I need you to sleep next to me. We went to the bedroom. He pulled me down beside him, his arms around me like I was tethered to him. Like physical proximity was the only thing keeping him grounded. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing deepening, his body going slack in a way that suggested he trusted me enough to be vulnerable. I lay awake in the darkness, my mind turning over everything I'd learned. He'd killed people, multiple people, not in defense, but in calculated response to an insult. He was capable of this kind of violence the way most people were capable of making coffee, habitually, efficiently, without moral complexity. And somehow, knowing this didn't make me want to leave. If anything, it bound me tighter. Because now I understood what I'd been approaching all along. This wasn't a love story. This was a descent into someone else's reality, and I was choosing it willingly, with full knowledge of what he was capable of. He stirred in his sleep, pulled me closer, and I let myself be pulled, let myself exist in the space he'd created. Let myself become, finally, the kind of woman who could love a man like this. A woman who understood that safety and morality were luxuries for people who didn't need his kind of protection. The next 2 weeks were a study in absence. Dante moved between the safe house and Manhattan, managing the aftermath of the Victor situation, cleaning up his people, consolidating power, making sure that the other families in New York understood exactly what challenging him would cost. He'd return at odd hours, smelling of car leather and violence, and I'd help him clean the blood from his skin without asking questions anymore. I was becoming someone new, someone who could look at a man she was falling in love with and see the capacity for destruction without flinching. It was on day 16 that everything collapsed. He came back late, and I could tell immediately that something was different. Not just tired, broken. The kind of broken that suggested he'd witnessed something that had cracked even his carefully constructed armor. What happened? I asked. He didn't answer. Just moved to the kitchen, poured himself whiskey, drank it, standing up like it was medicine. I waited. Patience was a skill I'd developed. They found a wire, he finally said. In my organization. Someone's been reporting to federal agents for 3 years. They've documented everything. Every transaction, every person we've moved money through, every violent act. My stomach dropped. How long before? 2 weeks maybe. Once they know they've lost the mole, they'll move. RICO charges probably, conspiracy, narcotics, murder, 25 to life for most of my people. 45 for me if they make enough of the violence stick. He said it the way someone might discuss a weather report, but his hand was shaking as he poured the second drink. What are you going to do? I moved closer, carefully. You could run. We could. No. He looked at me with those dark eyes, and I saw something in them that had never been there before, something close to surrender. I built this. I accepted the responsibility when I chose to be this kind of man. Running would mean abandoning everyone who depended on me. You mean you'd rather go to prison than protect yourself? I mean I'd rather be the kind of man who faces the consequences of his choices. He set down the glass. But before I do that, I need to know you're taken care of. I need to make sure my people understand that touching you means touching me from beyond walls. I need to set up structures that will keep you safe for the rest of your life. Dante, I'm going to turn myself in tomorrow, on my terms. I have lawyers who can negotiate the best possible outcome. I'll plead guilty to most of it. Try to take the heat off my people. My second in command will take over the operation. And you, he reached out, cupped my face in his hands. You're going to disappear into a life I've already prepared. New identity. New city. New everything. I don't want a new life. I want this one. You want me, he said it gently. But you don't actually want to be a woman waiting for her man to come home from a federal prison. You don't want to spend 25 years visiting me in a cell. You don't want to become the tragic girlfriend that everyone pities at dinner parties. You don't get to decide what I want. I do. Because I love you. He said it like it was final, like love gave him the right to make my decisions. I love you enough to let you go. I love you enough to give you a choice to be free of this. I don't want to be free of this. But he was already moving away, already returning to the role of the man in control of every situation. He made calls, set up meetings. By morning, I had a new passport, new documentation, a new name, and a new story. Sarah Mitchell, marketing executive, relocated from Denver to Portland, the kind of person who didn't have a dark boyfriend and a dark future. When do I leave? I asked. Tomorrow. My driver will take you to the airport. You'll fly to Portland. You'll have an apartment waiting, a job starting in 2 weeks, money in accounts that will last you longer than you could possibly imagine. And if I don't go, then you're implicated in my operation. You're a witness they'll try to turn. You're someone I've put in danger through association. He was cold now, every wall back up. You're not leaving me a choice. Margot, you're leaving me no choice but to protect you by releasing you. This is bullshit. You love me. You said it. So don't. I do love you. Exactly why I'm not letting you stay. He moved to the window, looked out at the Westchester morning. The last decent thing I'll ever do is give you the option to be free. I'm taking it. I realized then that I couldn't argue him out of this, that he'd made the decision with the same ruthlessness he applied to everything else in his life, that my love for him, and his for me, was being used as the justification for the cruelest possible goodbye. Let me stay one more night, I whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned, came back to me, pulled me into his arms. One more night. We didn't leave the bedroom. We existed in each other without speaking, without demanding, without anything except the simple reality of touch. He made love to me with a kind of aching tenderness that felt like goodbye. And I let him, because fighting was pointless and this moment was all I was going to get. When I woke at dawn, he was already gone. There was a letter on the pillow, written in his careful hand. I'm sorry for loving you this way. I'm sorry for teaching you that love could feel like violence. But I'm not sorry for knowing you. That will be the best decision I ever made, even though it has to end. Be happy. Be safe. Be free. Be everything I can never be. D. I didn't go to Portland. I sat in the safe house for 6 hours, staring at the passport that belonged to Sarah Mitchell, holding the letter that Dante had left like it was a holy object. The driver waited outside. The sun moved across the sky. And I made a choice. I called Sienna. I'm not going, I told her. She didn't seem surprised. He said you might say that. He did? He said you were the bravest woman he'd ever known, that you'd probably do something insane like this. She appeared in the doorway, armed but unthreatening. He also said that if you did refuse to leave, I should tell you the truth. What truth? That he didn't turn himself in. Sienna sat on the edge of the bed. Not yet. He's still in Manhattan, still consolidating power, still buying time. He told you he was turning himself in to make you leave, to get you away from him before everything falls apart. But he's not actually planning to. Then what is he planning? To disappear, to move operations south, to become the kind of ghost that federal agents spend years chasing and never quite catch. She paused. But he said he couldn't do that with you in the picture, because you'd always be the person the government could find, and therefore the person they could use to find him. I felt something shatter and reform in my chest. He'd lied to protect me. He'd manipulated me into leaving because he believed it was the only way to keep me safe. Where is he? I asked. I can't tell you that. Then get him a message. I spent the next hour writing a letter, not the careful kind Dante had written, but the desperate kind that came from the realization that I'd been making a choice to stay all along, and he couldn't override that by choosing to leave. You don't get to decide my future. You don't get to love me and then use that love as the reason to abandon me. I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that you think you're protecting me, but protection isn't the same as love if it means erasing my choice. I'm not Sarah Mitchell. I'm Margot Chen. I'm the woman who offered wine to a Mafia boss. And I'm staying. I'm waiting. I'm becoming whatever I need to become to find you again. So either kill me or let me stand beside you. Those are the only options I'm accepting. Sienna took the letter without promise that Dante would receive it. I stayed in the safe house for another 3 days while she made arrangements. And then one morning, a different driver came. Not for the airport. For Manhattan. The apartment in Tribeca looked exactly as I'd left it. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the expensive air, understanding that I was becoming the kind of woman who belonged in spaces like this. Spaces built on violence and control, and the specific kind of love that looked like obsession. The sun was setting when I heard the elevator. When the door opened and he emerged, looking thinner than I remembered. Older in a way that suggested the last few weeks had taken something essential. He stopped when he saw me. "Margot, you can't." "I can. I am." I moved toward him. I refused to leave. "I'm standing here. Now make a choice about what happens next." He looked at me like I was something he couldn't quite believe in. Then he pulled me against him so hard that I couldn't breathe. And I understood that this was his surrender. This was the moment his control finally broke in the face of something he couldn't manipulate or control or direct. "I was trying to protect you," he whispered into my hair. "I know. But I don't want your protection anymore. I want your truth. I want your risk. I want to know exactly what you're planning and why. And I want to make informed decisions about whether I'm going with you or not." He pulled back, looked at me, and something in his expression shifted into something closer to acceptance. "The federal investigation is real, but my turning myself in was a fiction. I have 3 weeks before they move. In that time, I'm moving the operation to Venezuela, establishing new networks, creating a version of myself that's harder to find. And then I come back. In 5 years, maybe 10. Once the pressure dies down, once my name becomes old news and everyone forgets that Dante Rossi ever existed, I'm coming with you. You can't. You have to. I'm coming with you," I repeated, "to Venezuela or wherever. But I'm not becoming Sarah Mitchell. I'm becoming your wife." He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "That's the worst possible decision you could make." "I know. I'm making it anyway." He married me 3 days later, in a small ceremony with his lawyer and a judge who didn't ask questions because money had already answered them. We didn't have witnesses. Didn't have any of the traditional elements. Just 2 people making vows in a room that smelled like legal documents and inevitability. When the judge pronounced us married, Dante kissed me, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness, not safety, but a kind of rightness that came from finally accepting who I was becoming. A woman who loved a dangerous man. A woman who'd chosen to walk into that darkness willingly. A woman who'd surrendered her old life not because she'd been forced to, but because the alternative, losing him, was unbearable. The warehouse in Newark was cold concrete and echoing silence. We were there to complete a final transfer, the last of the operations being handed over to Dante's second-in-command before we disappeared into our new life. It was supposed to be routine, strategic, safe, which is why I should have known something was wrong when the lights went out. Dante's hand moved to the gun at his waist, his entire body going rigid beside me. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, "and don't move regardless of what happens." The first shot came from somewhere above a sniper on the warehouse's upper level. It hit the concrete near my feet, sending up dust and the sharp smell of gunpowder. Dante pushed me down, covered me with his body, and returned fire into the darkness with a kind of terrifying precision. "This way," he hissed, pulling me toward the shadows. But there were more of them than we'd anticipated. The whole operation began to collapse in real time, shots from the north, the south, the warehouse becoming a place where survival meant thinking faster than you'd ever thought in your life. Dante moved with the kind of brutal efficiency that reminded me exactly who I'd married. The kind of man who understood violence in a language most people never learned. He was hit in the shoulder. I felt him flinch, heard his sharp intake of breath, saw the blood bloom across his shirt. But he didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Just kept moving, kept shooting, kept pulling me through the darkness toward something that might have been safety. "Come on." He pulled me toward a loading dock that led to the street. We were almost there when his second-in-command appeared, a tall man named Marco who'd always reminded me of a very dangerous accountant. "Go," Marco said, pressing his own gun into Dante's hand. "I've got 6 minutes before backup arrives. Use them." "Thank you," Dante said. And I understood in that moment the kind of loyalty that violence creates between men who fought together. We ran. The car was waiting. It was always waiting, and the driver knew exactly where to take us. Not the airport. Not Venezuela immediately. Somewhere safer, somewhere we could think. A hospital disguised as a private clinic that specialized in questions nobody asked. The bullet had gone through Dante's shoulder cleanly. The doctor, a man who owed us favors, said he'd be fine with rest. But there was something else. The doctor took me aside while Dante was sleeping off the anesthesia. He's been running on adrenaline and pure rage for the last 3 weeks, the doctor said quietly. His body is starting to shut down. If he doesn't actually rest, real rest, for at least a week, his immune system is going to collapse. He'll be vulnerable to infection, to complications from the wound, to things that will kill him, even though the bullet wound itself was survivable. I sat beside Dante's hospital bed and watched him sleep, watched the rise and fall of his breathing, counted the scars on his visible skin, understood, for the first time, the full cost of what he was, not just the danger he posed to others, but the danger he posed to himself, the way power and violence and constant vigilance were eating him alive from the inside. "I'm sorry," he murmured in his sleep, his hand reaching for me. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," I said, even though he couldn't hear me. "I'm here." We stayed in the clinic for 5 days, not disappearing to Venezuela yet, just existing in a space between his old life and whatever came next. I watched him sleep, watched him wake in pain and refuse medication, watched him make phone calls to people whose names he wouldn't tell me because he was protecting me right up until the moment we disappeared. On the final day, the federal agents came. I heard them first footsteps in the hallway. Voices. Law enforcement has a specific energy, a kind of certainty that they own the space they're moving through. Dante was awake, reaching for the gun underneath his pillow, but I put my hand on his chest. "Don't," I said. "Let me talk to them. Margot, let me." I opened the door before they could knock. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all wearing the particular exhaustion of federal agents who'd been chasing a ghost for 3 weeks and were losing faith that the ghost actually existed. "You're Margot Rossi," the woman said. Not a question. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I lied smoothly. "I'm not sure why you're here. We're looking for Dante Rossi. We have information suggesting that he's in this clinic." I smiled. The kind of smile a woman who loves someone might smile when she's protecting them. "I think you have the wrong clinic. I'm here for shoulder surgery. Not very interesting, and certainly not worth your time." But even as I said it, I could feel the lie coming apart. These weren't the kind of agents who showed up on bad tips. Something had happened. Someone had talked. "If you're protecting him," the male agent said, "you're committing a federal crime." "I'm not protecting anyone. I'm just visiting a clinic where I'm having medical work done." They could have pushed. Could have gotten a warrant, searched the room, found Dante, but the woman who had the sharp eyes of someone who'd learned to read situations in real time seemed to understand something about the dynamic of the moment. She stepped back. "If you see him," she said, handing me a card, "you should convince him to turn himself in. He's a smart man. He should understand that the only way his wife gets a future is if he does the right thing." They left. I stood in the doorway, holding the card, understanding that they'd just offered me a gift, a choice, a real one this time. I turned back to Dante, who was sitting up, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You could have sold me," he said quietly. "You could have pointed them in the right direction and gotten your old life back. I know. Why didn't you?" I sat beside him on the hospital bed. "Because I made a choice, a real one. When you tried to send me away, I chose to stay. When federal agents showed up at my door, I chose to protect you, and I'll keep choosing you, again and again. Because that's what it means to love someone like you." He reached for me with his good arm, pulled me against him. "I don't deserve you. You don't." I said it without kindness, just truth. "But you're stuck with me now." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that seemed to surprise him, and in that moment, I understood that this was our actual wedding, not the legal ceremony, but this. The moment we both accepted that we were choosing each other despite everything, because of everything. Against all good sense and against all odds, we left the clinic that night, drove to a private airstrip, and flew south without looking back at the country we were leaving behind. Dante slept beside me on the plane, his head against my shoulder, the wound bandaged and beginning to heal. The sun rose over the Atlantic, and I watched it with the specific wonder of someone who'd just walked through fire and found herself on the other side with the person she loved. We didn't know what waited in Venezuela, didn't know how long we'd have before something collapsed again. But sitting in that plane, watching the man I loved sleep despite all the violence and danger that was still coming, I understood that some loves are built on risk, that some people choose each other not because they make life safer, but because they make life real. I'd offered a Mafia boss wine at a gallery opening. He'd whispered that I was coming with him. And somehow, in all the chaos and blood and impossible choices, we'd found our way to each other. Not as the end of a story, but as a beginning that would probably end in darkness. And somehow, I was already okay with that.